Chapter 12. GM Food, Genetically Modified, GM. Food farmers in North America have been ruined by being taken to court by Monsanto for using its GM seeds without a license when the seeds arrived on the wind from passing trucks carrying genetically modified crops and from contaminated farms that had no wish to grow GM organisms. The fact that Monsanto has been winning these cases is confirmation of how the corporations control much of the so-called justice system, which is rigged against the people in every country. This is a quote by David Icke. Genetically modified food generally have had its genes altered by scientists in a laboratory to help a certain crop to resist weeds, disease and insects, increase its nutrient value and or to lengthen its shelf life. In the US, in 2006, 1,200 lawsuits were filed against Bayer Crop Science AG claiming damages from their GM rice seed. The seed wasn't approved for humans to eat, but farmers in 5 states claimed that the modified seed has escaped and contaminated rice supplies in over 30% of US rice land. Because of this, there was a 14% decline, which meant lower prices paid for rice and a subsequent loss to farmers of $150 million. GM foods have taken a beating in Europe in recent years, and that was summed up by BASF Plant Science President and CEO Peter X, who said that the socio-political climate and the regulatory conditions do not give us any indication that the genetically modified plants can be successfully commercialized in Europe in the years to come. Unfortunately, this is not the case elsewhere, in countries such as the United States and India. Anthony Gucciardi reported that the USDA has allowed Monsanto to run rampant, modifying staple crops, food items and milk. Monsanto's RBGH is a synthetic hormone created using molecules and DNA sequences that are a result of molecular cloning, which has been linked to breast and gastrointestinal cancer. In the US, this synthetic hormone is present in a third of all milk. It is banned in 27 countries around the world. Some people believe that GM crops may be responsible for the die-off of bees, the critical pollinator in the environmental food chain. Mind you, if there are fewer bees to pollinate, there is less food to feed the population, and therefore it slowly reduces the population, which is all part of the agenda of the elite. GM foods can cause damage to the organs, and most significantly they destroy the immune system. This is a quote by Patricia Corey. Genetically modified food is not required in order to feed the world. In India's poorest state, the farmers there are setting world records growing rice and other foods without the interference from genetically modified organisms and synthetic herbicides manufactured by the big companies. The biotech industry claims that the world can only be fed with its heavily doused chemical herbicide-laden crops. In India, this region is providing food for so many people. It has been producing some of the biggest yields on record at 22.4 tons of rice on only 1 hectare of land. These yields have been achieved using age-old methods of using farmyard manure instead of man-made chemicals. World Bank-funded scientists at the Philippines-based International Rice Research Institutes indicate that records have been broken along with all multinational companies' genetically modified seed crops in the United States and in Europe. Sumant Kumar and his friends in the villages in Bihar had to prove their results to university experts who accused them of cheating. But his success is due to SRI, which is an approach to crop development evolving in France in the 1960s to deal with seed scarcity. The SRI system of rice intensification aims to produce more from less. Kumar was able to produce these fantastic results in the following way: seedlings being transplanted at an early age in single seed instead of many or in clumps, wider spacing of plants using a square pattern, The soil was moist but not flooded as in traditional rice farming. Only organic fertilizers were used and rotary weeding was practiced. Those techniques allowed them to plant more on less acreage to gain improved yields without resorting to overpriced GM seeds or the use of man-made herbicides or fertilizers. This technique can eliminate the dependency on outside sources as well as break cycles of dependence of large companies, as well as providing healthy, organic food to many people. Inspired by the success of Kumar, the Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz visited the Nalanda district in India and recognized the potential of this organic farming method, telling the villagers that they were better than scientists. Adding to this, Christina Serich at humansarafree.com said that it was very much better than biotech scientists who have sold the world a lie that you can't feed the masses without Monsanto's patented seed and best-selling chemicals. Dr. Stanley Ewan is a consultant histopathologist at Aberdeen Royal Infirmary. He's one of Scotland's experts on tissue diseases and warned in a report that eating GM food could cause cancer. He reported to a government health committee that he expressed great concern about the use of the cauliflower mosaic virus as a promoter in GM food that could increase the risk of stomach and colon cancers. He went on to say that the infectious virus is used like a tiny engine to drive implanted genes to express themselves and could encourage the growth of polyps in the stomach or colon. Dr. George Wald, a Harvard biology professor with a Nobel laureate in medicine, stated that our morality up to now has been to go ahead without restriction to learn all that we can about nature. Restructuring nature was not part of the bargain. This direction may not only be unwise, but dangerous. Potentially, it could breed new animal and plant diseases, new sources of cancer, novel epidemics. According to Jeffrey Lean at the Daily Mail, there is a secret conspiracy to force us all to eat GM food. After a Daily Mail campaign over a decade ago, the British people decisively rejected GM food, forcing it off supermarket shelves, but the controversial technique has been making a silently slow return. The Daily Mail reported in February 2016 that most of the meat eaten comes from animals reared on GM feed. 80% of the maize and soy in their food comes from modified crops, another reason to be vegetarian/vegan. Liz O'Neill, the director of the anti-GM lobby group GM Free, said the public will be very surprised. David Hughes, professor of food marketing at Imperial College London, told a farming conference that we find it convenient not to make a big noise about it. Convenient to who? Themselves. That's all right then. The beneficiaries of the reintroduction of GM technology to our food chain are the big corporations. The likelihood of GM crops being grown in Britain had been high in the past following an agenda set up in Brussels, but now it is unclear with Brexit voted for and upon the horizon. It is 20 years since the first genetically modified product hit the shelves, and it was tomato puree. Within a few years, 60% of the food on supermarket shelves contained modified ingredients. Widespread cultivation of these GM crops that were designed to resist herbicides seem very close. Fields could be sprayed to get rid of weeds without harming the crop itself. The biotech companies designed such crops as well as the herbicides to be used on them, and of course they did well in the world's stock exchanges. Tony Blair, not a surprise, boasted about making Britain the European hub of GM technology. In 1999, the Daily Mail began asking some probing questions together with some notable voices including Prince Charles, and the public made its verdict clear in 2004 when 84% of Britons avoided such GM food. The cultivation of modified crops in Britain was banned after extensive government trials showed that they did more damage to wildlife than normal crops did. According to Lean, The GM giants Monsanto and Bayer Crop Science withdrew applications to get new varieties approved, but unfortunately they did not go away, nor did underhanded attempts by the British government and the European Commission to reintroduce them into our food chain. In 2008, the then EC President José Manuel Barroso called 2 secret meetings of special representatives of European prime ministers. Minutes of this meeting show that they resolved to speed up the spread of GM technology and to deal with the public opposition. In 2010, GM fed meat appeared in British supermarkets, and in 2011 the EU decided to allow animal feed to contain low levels of GM crops not approved for safety. Despite David Cameron's, the ex-Prime Minister, 2010 election manifesto declaring to be tough on GM technology, he let it be known that he was working to speed things up with the spreading of the technology. Presently, in 2016, GM-fed meat is the closest that Britons are coming to this so-called technology. Conor McVeigh of McDonald's admitted at the conference that families did not like GM food but said it is becoming increasingly difficult to source non-GM feed. Personally, I cannot imagine that one of the world's biggest brands could not create a scenario where animals supplied to them as food cannot be fed GM food. Surely it can't be that difficult. France, Germany, Austria and Luxembourg have government-sponsored schemes to label non-GM fed meat, milk and eggs. Can we expect to see that soon? Of course not. Interestingly, in his book Rise of the New World Order, J. McCall Thomas Hayes writes that most breakfast cereals in the United States are made from GM corn, and that the scientists tweaked the corn's genetics in a way that the corn now has the power to create natural insecticide, making the spraying for bugs unnecessary. In 2011, the Global Citizens report entitled "The GM Emperor Has No Clothes" found that contrary to the claim of feeding the world, genetic engineering has not increased the yield of a single crop. It also found that herbicide-tolerant Roundup Ready crops were supposed to control weeds, while crops with the biological herbicide Bacillus thuringiensis were intended to control pests. But GM crops have led to the emergence of super weeds and super pests. They also found that despite claims that GM organisms will lower the levels of chemicals used such as pesticides and herbicides, the opposite has happened, with £1.6 billion of glyphosate being applied to US oil in 2007. Monsanto has claimed that through genetic engineering, it can breed crops for drought tolerance and other climate-resilient traits. This is a false promise. So do we really need GM food? According to the Yahoo Finance pages in 2016, every year Britain generates about 10 million tons of food waste that gets thrown away. Because of this, campaigners have opened what they say is the country's first waste food supermarket. The Real Junk Food Project opened a specific warehouse in Leeds, Yorkshire, and it will sell surplus stock gathered from supermarkets, local business, restaurants and allotments. It works on the same basis as their cafes. People will pay what they feel is appropriate, either in cash or by donating their time or offering their skills in exchange for goods. Apparently the Real Junk Food Project has mushroomed, as it is now a global concern with more than 120 cafes around the world. Great idea. According to the Trussell Trust, the austerity era since the global crash in 2008 has seen a noticeable increase in the numbers of people visiting food banks. 7 years ago the trust was handing over just under 26,000 emergency 3-day supplies of food, and in the past year that has risen to 1.1 million.